Good afternoon, fellow surveyors and guests. I'd expected I might get away today with spending a while yarning with professional colleagues, showing you some pictures and generally indulging in a bit of nostalgia for some pretty fun engagement with the National Geodetic Survey, the National Topographic Mapping Programs, and especially to regale you with tales from a hugely privileged involvement in the exploratory phase of the last unknown on Earth's surface, Antarctica. And what a place it is, this Antarctica. Nearly twice the size of Australia, the highest, driest, coldest, windiest, most isolated continent on Earth. When I became first involved with it, about 85% of this continent, twice the size of Australia, was not only unexplored, but unsighted in all time by any living creature. There is nowhere else on Earth like it, for very good reasons. It's full of contradictions and wonders. On average, about 10 times as high as Australia, by a wide margin, the biggest and driest desert in the world. Average annual temperature, continent-wide, is about minus 55 degrees. The lowest recorded temperature, minus 98.4. Below about minus 60 or so, any fluid in the sinus cavities in your face will freeze. And it is utter, unspeakable agony. The pain of a major heart attack, I tell you, is merely a temporary distraction compared to frozen fluid in the sinuses. It's the windiest continent on Earth. Winds of 100 kilometres an hour are commonplace. Winds of 200 kilometres an hour are merely not frequent. Winds of 300 kilometres an hour are rare, but in many regions quite on the cards. Now those are just figures. Here's what they mean. 100 kilometres an hour is storm force, that is more than strong gale force. 200 kilometres an hour is well beyond hurricane and doesn't even get considered in normal wind scales. They don't even go up anywhere near that high. 300 kilometres an hour is just laughable. It's just ridiculous. I've seen 120 knots, say about 220 kilometres an hour, tear a fully laden DC-3 aircraft, weighing 32,500 pounds, about 16 tonnes, about 8 full-size land cruisers, torn by the wind behind its wind fence, which allegedly reduced the wind velocity by about 25%. And the 16-tonne aeroplane was torn from the 70-tonne safe working load tie downs and blown 15 kilometres. That's a decent wind. Sledgers, those who are out with their dogs in their little fabric tent, tend not to dwell on memories of winds like that when you're lying in your little 2 metre long, 1.5 metre wide, 1.5 metre high. Get to know your comrades pretty well in there after 4 months. None of who's had a wash of any form for 3 or 4 months. Not because you're pigs, well, not only because you're pigs, because you don't have the opportunity to do anything else. You might even have a dog or two in there that's doing it a bit hard in there with you to get a bit of a rest. Say, maybe 3 blokes and a couple of dogs in 2 metres by 1.5 metre floor space. I was going to have a bit of a chuckle too about the Geodetic Survey Australia. Quaint technology like geodometers and teleurometers, T4 astronomical theodolites, and about the Topo Survey and aerodistance stereomats and topocarts and A8s and slotted templates and numerical block adjustments, all done on computers that wouldn't run your fridge these days. It was with some alarm, therefore, that I read the last circular sent out about today's event and saw that I was to speak about life in Antarctica. Well, no problem there, just you try and stop me. I was going to talk about traditional surveying methods that were used. Oh, okay, I will if you like, but they're so utterly irrelevant, so totally irrelevant to your life these days. So, but the really alarming bit was to see that I was going to talk about wisdom and life lessons. All I can say is, me. I'm the bloke that spent so much time in Antarctica. Wisdom. But the bit that really alarmed me was that I was going to be so bold as to make predictions about the future of surveying. Well, I accept that I must have said something somewhere along the track that gave the impression that I thought that I knew something about that subject. I wildly overestimated my prescience. Not only am I, in terms of the pace at which technology has advanced and society's demands changed since I last involved in the profession, at least a generation out of date, but more importantly, my views have absolutely no relevance whatsoever. I shall be of absolutely no influence upon the future of surveying. I'm merely part of what once was. You will make surveying what it will be, not me. What I can do, however, is tell you something of the past of surveying. Hopefully, in satisfied and glowing enough terms to move you to do something about everything possible to ensure that the future of our profession equals or surpasses all the best bits of the past, and none of its lesser bits. If you do so, a prediction I will make, and I make it with greatest confidence, is that our community, our profession, and you personally will get great benefit and satisfaction out of it. So please bear with me and indulge me as I try, as hard as I know how, to do something I consider important and with some merit. I promise we'll get to the fun bit pretty quickly. It won't be too long. We'll get some pickies in a minute. After a somewhat ropey start as a very sickly infant, had diphtheria twice before I was 4, near fatal whooping cough at 3, crippling polio at 5, plus all the more commonplace afflictions and accidents of an infancy of the time, just while my parents didn't take the loss, send me back and make a warranty claim. It's completely beyond, completely beyond. But thereafter I've enjoyed a remarkably fortunate life. One of the bits of seriously good fortune I've had was to enter my loosely termed adult life, my professional life, where and when I did, namely in Western Australia, slap bang in the middle of the 20th century and a period of huge agricultural, pastoral and industrial growth. As was well known at the time, civilisation, let alone the 20th century, didn't exist anywhere west of Adelaide. As I recall, it was still only about the early 1900s north of the Tweed too, so you're not so superior either. One characteristic of our backwardness in Western Australia was that surveyors were very, very visible in the community and were very highly regarded by it. Many folk in those times even referred to surveyors as Mr. Surveyor so-and-so. I liked and hugely benefited from my relationship from the outset with the rough and tumble of field survey parties. I particularly owe wonderful Ben Scrivener, a senior survey hand, 55, 60-ish, time I knew him, veteran of the horrors of the Western Front, man who knew more about more things, including himself and other human beings, than anyone I've ever met. He could do more things than anyone I ever met. And I was fortunate enough to work alongside him for almost 4 years. In public, Ben always called me and referred to me, even as a 17-year-old eager but pretty inept cadet, as Mr. Kirkby. Mind you, what he called me in private was often quite pungent, and his apparent public respect and regard for me did not by one jot reduce the rigours of the demands he made of me. Now, I've just got to say thank you, Ben. You're a big shareholder, for whatever it's worth. I found I liked the sort of regard from my community that surveyors received, and so it was not just dead easy but indeed well larded with self-interest to commit to the working life I've had. Of course, I don't mean the attraction of public accolades. Apart from anything else, the inescapable knowledge that with public accolades, one is merely a representative of all who have been shareholders, like Ben Scribner, in one's development. That's simultaneously humbling and exalting. But the sense of putting value into the community is a heady brew. I've also hugely enjoyed the actual work. Huge fun, huge excitement. And I'm sure, if you think about it, it cannot be a jot less so now. The excitement you gain from your working life is a measure of the excited commitment you put in. So it's there. So let me be a wicked uncle, an advocate similar or self-indulgent to you, as I had. Indulge yourself in your most enjoyed pursuits, what you perceive as your most noble pursuits, even if, lamentably, they generally seem to be the least materially beneficial ones. But you get by, you get by. Indulge yourself in feeling good about yourself and proud of your colleagues and your calling. Indulge yourself in your working life such that you want to run the last few hundred metres to work each day just to get at it. Indulge yourself in being just a bit different, just a bit above the ruck. What a bonus to enjoy what you can put into the mix as well as what's come out. Now that's a pretty good future for surveying, and I think you made a damn good start on it with the Surveyors Trust. Now, I am going to do what I thought I'd get away with doing only, just show you some pictures. The thing called LIMA, Landsat Image Map of Antarctica, a wondrous piece of survey and mapping technology. It's about 8,000 individual Landsat images, plus about another 1,000 or so around the pole, because Landsat doesn't capture images of the actual pole. Joined, rectified. You can access it, manipulate it down to pixels about 200 square metres. There's another one, its name escapes me at the moment, but there's another later, higher resolution one, which you can manipulate down to 20 metre pixels. Wondrous, wondrous technology. Highest, driest, windiest continent, 98% ice and snow. In winter, when the sea freezes, the area under ice more than doubles. So sitting down there around the South Pole is about 4 times the size of Australia, painted stark white, reflecting back out into space nearly all the energy that strikes it. Is it any wonder that it's the biggest single engine of world weather? Hugely, hugely dominant. We knew the heave and swell of the Southern Ocean in little chartered ice ships. That's one from later years, shipped about 2.5 times as big as the early ones. Not a rough day. Nobody takes pictures on rough days. We knew the ship falling off the top of a huge swell, burying its bow in the great grey ocean, the minus 1.9 degree ocean. A few instants after that photograph is taken, all of that green water will bash onto this. Hundreds of tons of water will smash onto the deck. In the early years, the ship was less than half the size, as I said, and 14 expeditioners lived in here. Well, sort of lived. They slept there. To eat, they had to come out of a steel door there and make their way over the open deck back to the superstructure of the ship, which was on the aft of the ship. The deck was covered in building materials and drums of fuel and trucks and aeroplane bits and pieces. You would wait for this to happen, that water to crash on the deck and the ship would start to lift. You would open the door and go like all get out. Out of here, along the side, clambering over the drums, hoping you would be back at the aft superstructure before it next buried its nose in the ocean. If you weren't, you got very wet. In bad weather, we used to rig up cargo nets from here back to the superstructure to sieve the humans out as the water went back over the side. I don't think workplace health and safety was very advanced in those times. We knew hurricanes at sea. The big winds tearing the freezing spray off the water. Everywhere it hits the ship, it freezes onto it. So you get out there with your little tomahawks and chop it off before it gets too much build up on the top, on the superstructure, and risks capsizing the ship. The piquancy of this photograph is added to by the fact that that's actually in a protected harbour. And you can see about 50 metres, 40 metres to the left of the photo is actually a shoreline and huts and things of that nature. So it's a fairly robust weather system going through. That's the little ship, the first one we used, a Beaver, great, sort of like the Toyota Hilux of aeroplanes, tough little brute. Had a fairly intimate association with the ocean. This is probably a metre and a half above sea surface. That's the deck. So you're fairly intimately associated with the ocean you're sailing in. In those early years, it was wonderful. Anywhere you landed, you were a first lander. You were the first fleet in all times that had been there. Just marvellous. Fancy a 22-year-old kid indulging in stuff like that, eh? No wonder you're mad. We knew sailing alongside icebergs drifting around in the ocean. This particular one was about 95 nautical miles long and about half as wide. That is to say, it was longer than from Brisbane to Noosa. One block of floating ice. Now, one of the things that characterises most Antarctic people is their keenly inquiring minds. They really, really want to understand the significance of things. So when we sighted this 95-mile long iceberg, we started to think of what does it mean in human terms. And we imagined that we were going to cut it up into ice cubes and that we would lose about 20% of it in the process of cutting it up. And we would then have all the ice cubes and use them at the rate of 3 standard ice cubes per standard shot of scotch. And you would require the world's output of whiskey for 2.5 million years. And even in Antarctic terms, that has to be accepted as being a hell of a good party. We knew mountains going straight up out of the ocean, 2.5 miles high. That peak there is 2.25 miles high, straight up out of the ocean. You have no idea of scale or distance because there's nothing there that you've ever seen before and you can compare it to. So everything is strange. You look at a scene like that and you say, oh, great, Captain, land us over there at the bottom of this glacier and we'll hurl the dogs over and we'll head up there and we'll be up there about tea time tonight. And you'd find that if you landed there, come tea time tonight, you're about here somewhere. So it is disorienting in an astounding way rather than a distressing way. Not distressing at all. And then we arrive at our station. We've unloaded the ship, and the ship's gone away. 20 blokes are there for the next 12 months. You've been away from home perhaps by this time already for a couple of months. And the weather gets colder and the sun starts to dip down below the horizon. No longer is it lovely summer with 24 hours a day of sunshine. And the wind whips the freezing spray off the ocean. Unloading the ship, you unload the ship into, they used to be ducks, very much like a similar vehicle to larks, amphibious trucks, permanently wet and frozen from the spray. As a typical autumn morning at Mawson Station, wind blowing perhaps 30, 40 knots, minus a few, maybe 10, 15, something, not very cold yet. And the tearing spray. And then come up into March, mid-March or so, suddenly you get a calm night. The wind stops blowing one night. And by morning, it's this. As far as you can see, the minus 1.9 degree sea has frozen. It's only a little thin at this stage. It's maybe centimetre and a half thick. Tomorrow you can walk on it. In a week you could drive a tractor on it if you wanted to. Fortnight you land an aeroplane on it. If it doesn't blow out, which it generally does a few times. The wind comes up before it really gets consolidated. And this frozen sea, as you saw in the image, extends 700 miles round and about. One of the huge problems in Antarctica is fire, because you don't have water to fight it with. You've got putting a lot of heat into the system. Everything is absolutely tinder dry, and you've got a raging damn wind to fan any flames that start up. During the 1950s, we had a couple of significant fires in the stations. Nothing like the poor damn Russians who lost 8 men in one station fire. Ours were sort of in the realm of inconvenience rather than tragedies. But as a result of these fires, somebody in a warm office somewhere in Melbourne decided that what those lads down there really need to look after them is firefighting equipment. And they rushed out and bought several of these beautiful, at the time, Coventry Climax fire pumps, powered by a little all-alloy, 4-cylinder, single overhead camshaft, 1100cc engine. Good enough for John Cooper and Jack Brabham to use them in their racing cars. They were a ripper of a little engine. However, and I advocate this, always when you get a good idea, please say, and then what? Because the and then what really is seriously important, because nobody had thought of where the water was going to come from to use these fire pumps to put out the fires that were going to be a thing of history for us now that the new age has dawned upon us. So the fire pump was a completely useless notion, except they made ripper go-karts. They made ripper go-karts. Now there I am playing in the fastest fire pump in the Southern Hemisphere. In this autumn period, recreation is important for lots of reasons. One is because you like to play and you like to let off a bit of steam, and you've been working hard all summer and you've been building the station. And also you're fairly new into your little community, and so the building of the cohesiveness and the comradeships and whatnot, it's actually technically quite important apart from being good. So ice yachting one year was very popular. This was an ice yacht built by bloke, Queensland bloke here, Sparky, electrician. And it was blisteringly fast. If it was a racehorse, you'd swab it. It was just so much faster than anybody else's. Anyway, we were due to have the World Championship of Ice Yachting, and it was thought to be pretty much a foregone conclusion of how it would turn out. He would win and the rest would be nowhere. So the night before the big event, a couple of low-life types lured him up into the mess and diverted him with treacherous words and strong drink, while another couple of low-life types took his ice yacht into the workshop and welded half a tonne of scrap iron onto it. There's an equaliser. The true tragedy was that he still won. Cricket. It was very popular. The bloke in the background is appropriately dressed for Antarctic cricket. Windproofs and a sweater or two and some gloves and whatnot. The bloke batting is just an absolute bloody swank. He just really is. But the real thing that was really intolerable about him is that he could actually play cricket and the rest of us couldn't. So when the side was batting, he brought a set of creams down with him. And he'd go into the powerhouse and huddle himself over the diesel generators and change himself into his creams, cook himself up to about boiling point, rush out onto the ice, rattle up a quick 60 or so, dolly a catch to someone and get out before he got seriously cold. Now, one of the things about Antarcticans too, another one of the things about it, there are many things that characterise them. This one is their keen sense of compassion and care and fair play. And so as he walked out to bat one time, one of the fielding teams said, "What would happen, I wonder, if he couldn't get out when he got his 50 or 60? He'd like to get pretty cold, wouldn't he?" So he rattled up his quick 50 or 60 and dollied a catch to someone, and nobody could take a catch to save their life. The wicket keeper was nimble enough to keep the wicket out of being struck by the ball at any time. So he eventually had to retire hurt. But I'm pleased to say he was never a smart ass again. And then autumn's gone, we're now coming into early winter, and the sun's spending most of its time down below the horizon. And the aurora's been going on all the time. It's just you couldn't see it when it's daylight, but as soon as it gets dark, you're going to get aurora. And you get these wondrous, wondrous displays. These are all taken, pardon, with the old Kodachrome 1 back in the days when the standard exposure was f8 for a fortnight. And it was pretty slow film. But these wonderful, wonderful, wonderful moving, that's a modern one. By the one, once it's sort of May, sea ice is a metre or more thick, safe as a bank. And you can use it to travel on, land aeroplanes, whatever you like on it. And in those early years, we would saddle up the dogs and use the dogs extensively on travelling on the sea ice. We're the first people ever to penetrate the Prince Charles Mountains south of Mawson. Great area of hundreds and hundreds of kilometres of bare, windswept mountain. With the sun shining on it in the summer, 24 hours a day, gets hot until the sun goes around the other side of it and it gets cold and rock cracks and little fragments of rock break off and chip off in isolation. And the wind picks them up and blows them out onto the ice around the mountain peaks, where the sun shining on them melts them down into the ice surface. and leaves a little nasty knife-sharp edge of ice behind, and it cuts the dog's feet. So you quickly make up boots for the dogs out of tent repair stuff, ventile and leather. And then you watch the dogs like a hawk, because they will eat their boots as they will eat the sledge lashings and your boots and your clothing and anything at all, because they are starving. There's been no serious dog sledging done anywhere in the world for probably near 40 years now. As it's disappeared further and further into the past, it's become more and more endowed with romance and glamour. It never was romantic or glamorous. It was a dirty, foul, brutal business. It was a death sentence to the dogs. It was hideous, but it worked. And it worked at a time when nothing else on earth did or could work. Now, that doesn't stop those of us who did it seriously, waking half a century on, in the long dark watches of the night, stricken with absolute horror and remorse at some of the ways we used the dogs. But the point is, it did work. And remarkably, the dogs, for all of their lives, seem to be into it with their ears back. Dog which might fall down dead 6 hours later, greets you in the morning as though you're the greatest person on earth. And, oh, come on, let's go and do things, you and me, hey, come on. That's from a pre-winter trip we did in 1960, where we were landed by the ship some hundreds of kilometres away from Mort, and made our way back over the Enderby Land Hump, which was a very difficult bit of real estate, and a pre-winter journey, of course, which is pretty unusual. Bit character forming, they say of that one. And then we tried aircraft. And that was our search and rescue aircraft, a little Oster. It was a poor little pathetic thing. I've actually been in that when it's been going backwards relative to the ground, because well, this is not normally considered a viable way of transport. You go backwards. Great John Seaton and wonderful Dougie Lecky's offsider mate, the second pilot. What I think was an absolutely marvellous feat. By using the wind, he was able to let the wind blow him back and veer off to the left and right until he found a hole in amongst the sea ice, which was nice and smooth, and just using the wind with no forward motion, or virtually no forward, managed to drop the aeroplane into a hole in amongst the sea ice. Yeah, pretty clever stuff. Actually better than wandering albatrosses. Most of them were down the pub when they had takeoffs and landings, 101. Oh no, they did pretty well with takeoffs. It was landings that had them buffaloed. And wandering albatrosses need quite a lot of wind speed to land at all. And if they go away and then they come home and the wind's dropped, they don't know how to land. So they'll make pass after pass over their nest, and they're 1,000,000 miles an hour. The chick down on the ground. And eventually, after half a dozen pass, you can say, I don't know how to do this. So they just put everything away and follow their wings and crash. You hear the term whiteout used a lot, meaning in the sense of lots of snow in the air. That's not whiteout. Whiteout is a totally different phenomenon. Whiteout is where you have 100% cloud cover over 100% snow surface. Thin cloud cover. So sunlight permeates down through the cloud cover, reflects from the snow surface back up to the underside of the cloud and back down and around. It just keeps bouncing around until everything is totally evenly illuminated. No shadow, no conceptions of anything at all. The traditional thing is to say it's like being inside a ping pong ball. All you can see is white. And that was a circumstance where we'd been caught out, 3 helicopters had been caught out, and the weather came in very rapidly, and we had no option but to try and land them, and the vertigo just hit him like a steam train, and he just flew into the ground. And through winter, the emperor penguins have laid their eggs. In July, their chicks hatch. All the women have gone away, they've laid the egg, and the female, towards the end of summer, autumn, lays the egg, and she says to the cockbird, he comes rushing over and he picks it up and puts it on his feet and covers it with a flap of skin and feathers on his belly to keep it warm. And she says, "Have you got it there?" And he says, "Trust me, love, of course I got it. Of course I got it." So she says, "Oh, okay then, I'll see you later." And she and all the girls buzz off. And they go up to the northern edge of the pack ice and spend the winter partying and discoing. And all the fellas are there with the egg on their feet, and they can hardly move because I'm sure as the married men would understand, if you drop the baby, not consistent with domestic harmony. So he sits there, all the males sit there sullenly with the egg on their feet, and they can hardly move. They shuffle around, the wind blows and they die and whatnot. Then right in the middle of winter, just about when it's coldest of all, these damn chicks hatch. And the male bird has just enough resources left to partially shed his stomach lining and regurgitate it. And it's called penguin milk, and it's like colostrum in human beings. And he's got enough to give about 3 feeds to the chick, which might keep the chick alive for a day and a half. If in that day and a half window, the hen bird who has gone away 3 months before, does not return, then both the chick and the male bird, the male probably, the chick certainly, dead. And just in this tiny little window, out of the northern horizon, come these gaggles of female emperor penguins. They can recognise their own chick. They've never seen it before. They last saw it as an egg. They recognise their mate, and they come back and they walk up to the rookery and they say, "Hello dear, how was the winter?" And the male bird say, "How was the bloody winter, woman? How do you think winter was?" So she says, "Well, no, come on, no, steady down, just give me the baby, and you and the boys buzz off." And so they transfer the chick over onto her feet, and she feeds it, and she's got a crop absolutely full of rich, good stuff. Good stuff for raising chicks. And the sun's shining on their black backs, and they're nice and warm, and there's plenty of food about, and kids are off their hands. And as so often happens in such idle times, people tend to fall in love. And they do, and they mate. And the hen bird lays an egg, and the male rushes over and picks it up and puts it on his feet, and she says, "Have you got it there?" And he says, "Of course I've got it, love, trust me." And she says, "I'll see you later." And a collective sigh goes up from all the male birds. "Oh, bugger, we've done it again." One of the things that I noticed on my first trip was that people the expeditioners came from a huge range of backgrounds, just like all sorts of people. Some had extended loving families, some didn't. Some would go down there And the station leader would be given, before they went, 20 presents to take down for Christmas or birthday or whatnot. Another bloke might have none, because he had no one to give him to. So thereafter, any time I had influence upon the way it was conducted, I would write to families and say, get together and send one present for birthday and one present for Christmas. Don't bother about any more. I will just leave them in the shed on the wharf side in Melbourne, and I will arbitrarily pick one, and I have no idea whose it'll be. So you just better do this right. One present per event. And then as soon as you get to the station, you draw up 2 lists of all the people in the party. In one hat goes a slip for every gift recipient, and in the other one goes a slip for every gift maker, and you draw them out. And every gift maker knows for whom he is to make a gift for Christmas and midwinter, but no recipient, and they honoured this absolutely punctiliously, no recipient ever knows who made his present. This nativity scene, beautiful thing carved in Oregon and left out in the blasting wind to be eroded and raise the grain in it. And beautifully done by a Czech fella, plumber. Absolutely rabid, loony, atheist, mad as a hatter. Georgie Seidel. He had the job of making a present for David Robinson, a young ionospheric prediction scientist. Lovely, gentle young man, deeply, deeply religious. And George makes a nativity scene. And Drobo, the scientist, never knew who made his nativity scene. And that is the absolute essence of a good Antarctic expedition. That it's not just tolerance and acceptance and what, but it's a genuine closeness of spirit. And the wind tears the flags and chops the ends off them, and you've got to push around, and it's hard sometimes, but it's good. And probably the most beautiful dogs in the world. Thank you.